Welcome to your Daily 5 for Monday, August 28th, 2023. Listeners of a certain age may remember the days before HBO was just a terrible streaming service being propped up by the bones of Discovery. At one point, HBO was making a serious run as a competitor, or you might say alternative, to normal broadcast television. In fact, that's where the phrase, "it's not TV, it's HBO" came from, because HBO kind of carved out its own weird niche, where they were really showing premium movies and premium content, making their own documentaries and their version of TV movies. And one of those is from 1994, and it's called Witch Hunt. It's got a large cast list, but honestly, the main stars are Dennis Hopper, Sheryl Lee Ralph, and Penelope Ann Miller. Now, you will see people comparing this to Cast a Deadly Spell. And in fact, some people are saying it's a sequel to that film. But from what I've read and what I understand, it's not actually a sequel. It's what today we would call a reimagining. HBO tried to reimagine Cast a Deadly Spell. And the result is very similar to what you might get out of a film like Predator 2 or RoboCop 2. Now, if you take those sequels, and again, this isn't a sequel, but the quality comparison is the same. If you compare Predator 2 or RoboCop 2 to the original films, RoboCop or Predator, you are going to find that the original films are in a completely different league of quality. They are not the same types of films. However, if you separate them from the movies that came before, their predecessors, they're really fun films that you can enjoy immensely. I love both RoboCop 2 and Predator 2. There is no way you would ever convince me that they're on the same level of quality as the original films, but they're really fun as their own things. And that's what Witch Hunt is. If you're going to compare it to Cast a Deadly Spell, then just don't bother watching it, because you are going to find it to be an inferior version of that first movie, or I guess the original before it was reimagined. But if you just take it for what it is on its own, it's actually a pretty fun movie. Now, some people have compared it to Who Framed Roger Rabbit. There are definitely those elements. There's a little bit of LA Confidential sprinkled in there, but what I kept thinking of, honestly, was Lord of Illusions, the Clive Barker film, which I love. Great movie. And that's what I kept thinking of with this, where the individual that Dennis Hopper plays is named Harry Philip Lovecraft, which will give you a clue right off the bat that there's not a lot of subtlety in the writing of this film. If that's going to bother you, don't bother. Don't watch it, because you will be bothered by the fact that things are very, very explicit and obvious. In fact, if you miss the analogy to the Red Scare, the communist McCarthyism stuff, then boy, oh boy, you missed what the writers were throwing in your face. I mean, it's just all over there. But again, if you just go into this and you want an hour and a half of fun, noir films sprinkled with magic, Julian Sands essentially playing a watered-down version of Warlock. In fact, I'm going to call him Warlock when I review it on Friday and talk through the movie with Lando, because he's basically Warlock. It's just not as explicit a picture. That's the only really difference. Otherwise, this is Warlock in a 50s suit. That's what it is. And everybody else is just having a good time. It's not a particularly heavy picture. It's not trying to be Oscar material, but I think it works very well for what it's aiming for. It is trying to be what I would call a mid-level movie, or essentially an HBO TV movie, which is what it is. And I think within that space, judged on those merits, it's really fun. And it's, again, 90 minutes, you're in, you're out. Dennis Hopper gets to walk around playing a 50s detective who doesn't like to use magic in a world where everybody uses magic. In fact, I didn't really get the gimmick at first, and I realized that it wasn't, because there's a commercial that plays at the very beginning of the movie that's basically talking about everybody using magic. And at first I thought it was supposed to be a joke, and then I realized, oh no, this is the premise of the film, because I went into it knowing very little. I just decided to watch this one and not really look into what it was. And then once I realized, I'm like, oh, okay, this is interesting, because we don't get a lot of movies like this. We really don't. Cast a Deadly Spell, certainly. Lord of Illusions, which I've already talked about. And how many others? We don't get a lot of this magic noir stuff. You know, we just don't see a lot of it. So when it comes through, and there's a movie like this that's not terrible and that's entertaining and that I can have fun with, then I'm going to embrace it, because honestly, I wish they'd make more movies like this. I mean, Who Framed Roger Rabbit is the cartoon equivalent of this movie, where instead of magic, it's cartoons. And that's one of my favorite movies of all time. So I'd love to see people coming back to this type of film, you know, the magic noir film, the hard-boiled detective living in a world of magic. It's just such a neat concept, and we don't get a lot of it. So again, if we had tons of movies being made at a high level, would this be as memorable for me? Maybe not. But since we don't, and since this is fun, I would recommend it to people. Later.